Chapter 13. The kids let Burke get about 100 yards ahead of them, and then they followed. Away from the water, the fog was thicker, making it difficult to see him. Burke stopped at a street corner. He glanced at his watch, then looked around, as if waiting for someone. "What's he doing?" Josh asked. The kids were huddled next to a small food store that sold sandwiches. Delicious smells came through the open window. Burke looked at his watch again, then leaned against a sign. "Oh my gosh, look," Ruth Rose said. The sign Burke was leaning on said "Cable Car Stop." "He's going to get on a cable car," Josh said. Just then they heard a rattling noise. A cable car was headed down the street slowly. Burke raised an arm, and the car stopped. They saw him leap on. "We have to get on too," Dink said. "Let's go." "But he'll see us," Josh said. "Not if we get on the back," Dink said. "Let's see. There's a little platform. Run!" The kids sprinted and jumped onto the cable car just as it began moving. The car was crowded, and they hid behind a bunch of tourists with cameras and maps clutched in their hands. "Can you see him, Josh?" Dink asked. Josh was the tallest of the three. Standing on tiptoes, he peeked from behind his sketchbook over the heads of the tourists. "He's standing right by the front door," he said. So there's Burke. There are the kids. The car sped along, swerving and clattering as the underground cable pulled it up the hill along its route. It stopped twice for new passengers. When the car stopped a third time, the group of tourists clambered off, talking in a language the kids didn't understand. "He's getting off too," Josh whispered. The kids hopped off the rear of the car, keeping their eyes on Burke's back as he headed into the fog. "Where in the world are we?" Josh asked. "I think I know," Ruth Rose said. She bent over and picked up something. "Look at this." She was holding a flower blossom. "This is where the parade was last night," Dink said. "Look at the ground," Ruth Rose said. "There are blossoms everywhere. They fell off the floats." Burke walked slowly through the fog. The kids followed him, their footsteps muffled by the dampness. He stopped in front of a building the size of Dink's school back home. It was the warehouse where they'd seen the dragon. "What's he doing?" Dink asked. Burke had walked up to the door. The kids watched him pull something from his pocket. They heard a click, then a rattling noise. "That sounded like a lock," Ruth Rose said. "Yeah, and I'll bet Dink's laptop guy gave him the key," Josh said. Burke disappeared inside the building. "Come on," Dink said. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose scurried quietly to the door. An open padlock dangled from a hasp. The kids peered into the building. The floats sat in the darkness like sleeping giants. On top of the closest truck bed, Dink saw an oversized tiger crouching in a jungle setting. He could smell the flowers that made up the tiger's orange and black body. "This is where they keep the floats," Josh whispered. Along one wall lay the dragon. Its 200-foot length was only partly visible in the dim light. Dink thought it looked asleep. He had liked the dragon better when it was dancing along in the parade. "This place is creeping me out," Josh said. The three kids stepped inside. Josh pulled the door partly closed behind them. He folded his sketchbook and used it to wedge the door open a couple of inches. "What are you doing?" Dink whispered. "I hate dark places," Josh said. "My pad will let in a little light." They stood to let their eyes adjust. Looking around, Dink saw no windows. Then he felt a hand grab his arm. Ruth Rose pulled Dink down and whispered in his ear, "Look over by the dragon. I think I see a light." Tiptoeing, the kids headed toward that side of the massive space. As they drew closer, they could see Burke crouched by the dragon's head. In one hand, he held a flashlight. The other hand was inside the dragon's mouth. "What's he?" Dink stopped Josh from speaking. As quietly as possible, he drew his cell phone from his pocket. Getting down on his knees, Dink crawled toward the dragon. When he was as close as he dared go, he aimed the phone's camera lens at Burke's back. Burke pulled something from the dragon's mouth. It was a round object, the size of a tennis ball. He turned his light on the object and it blazed red. It was the ruby. Grinning, Dink pushed the button on his cell phone camera. It made a quiet clicking noise. Burke lurched around. What the? Leaping to his feet, he bolted toward Dink. Run! Ruth Rose screamed. Split up! Josh yelled. Dink raced for the nearest float, shoving his cell phone into a pocket. He nearly bumped into the float. Looking down, he saw the tiger leering down at him. Dink crawled under the truck bed and made himself as small as he could behind one of the rear tires. Some of the flowers and vines that made the tiger's jungle hung down over the sides of the truck. Dink felt hidden, but he knew Burke could find him with his flashlight. He wondered where Josh and Ruth Rose were hiding. Suddenly, an ear-splitting whistle pierced the air. Police! Freeze! A voice shouted. Dink peered out from under the truck. If the police were here, he was getting out of this place right now. He sprinted for the door as fast as his trembling legs would take him. Somebody grabbed him as soon as he had cleared the door. It was Josh who pulled Dink out of the way. Then Ruth Rose slammed the door shut and snapped the padlock. She turned and grinned at Dink. Josh and I made a plan when you went to take that guy's picture, she said. But the police, the whistle, Dink stammered. Ruth Rose held up her Swiss Army knife. From it dangled a tiny teddy bear and a shiny police whistle. That was me, she said. I was hoping Burke would think I was the police and hide, and you'd run outside. She dropped her knife into her backpack. And you did. Josh picked up his bent sketchbook. Now, use that cell phone of yours and call the real police, he said.